Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Alex Levin here, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Regal, and they are doing AI phone agents. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the most interesting thing you've learned about AI in the last week?
Well, I'll give you sort of a fun fact that is relatively new from our sort of data. Um, in in cases where AI agents are collecting payments from customers, so think about sort of you're late on your payment or something. People are actually more honest with the AI agent than they are with humans. So people are always talking about, are the AI agents as good as humans, things like that. And it turns out, I think, and now I'm speculating, but I think that what's happening is when you're talking with a human on the phone, you go, oh yeah, I'll pay that, and you're embarrassed to perhaps say that you can't afford to pay the bill. But when it's an AI, you don't have the same amount of, judging happening, let's say, and you're willing to be more honest. So I just thought that was sort of a fascinating example of the differences of interaction.
So the AI agents are now being deployed, they're voice agents, and there's a disclaimer beforehand that you're talking with an AI agent.
So right now, technically, you don't need to have a disclaimer in most places. So I'd say about half of our customers do put a disclaimer, half don't. Look, if you ask me, and I'm, very critical, I suppose, of our product, I don't think it's yet at a point where the voices are indistinguishable from humans. So if you're paying attention, I think you can tell that it's not a human that's talking to you on the phone. I think it's very conversational. The interactions are very good. You can interrupt. You can do all kinds of things that you couldn't do before. But I don't think it's that you think you're talking to a human. But I don't think that's the standard. I think the question is it performing as well? Meaning, is the CSAT high? Is it handling the things you want quickly? Is it getting the resolution? Is it containing the calls? And more, maybe more importantly, is it always available so there's no wait time? And that it's doing very well. So the performance is fine. Do I think that eventually it'll become indistinguishable? Yeah, I don't think we're far from that. It's just that's not the most important thing at the moment.
And what else can you share with our listeners? Because I know you're deep in this world, but I imagine a lot of my listeners aren't there yet. I don't think I've talked to a automated AI agent. Um, how quickly is this developing? Where are we at in terms of the usage? Like, what are the big use cases for deploying to an AI voice agent?
Sure. So I used to run a 3,000 person contact center. So come from that world, and we helped build a company called Angie's List in the United States and Home Advisor, which are sort of the big home services brands. And look, customer service is the hardest part of that business, right? And despite us trying as much as possible to get people not call us on the phone, over half of the interactions are phone interactions. So despite what people tell you, where they go, "Oh, I never want to talk on the phone," it's just not true. Like they want to talk on the phone. And it's a huge cost for businesses, which is really hard because you're sort of trying to give customers a good experience, but you're not, you don't want to spend too much money. And there's this like constant conflict, and you feel like you're underserving customers. Like, when was the last time you had a good customer experience with any brand? Like, you're calling, you're waiting on hold, there's some weird IVR, the agent you get maybe not that well trained. Like, it's not a great experience to start with. So, our belief from the beginning was there was, one more desire for voice, and voice was a more powerful channel than most people understood, and that there was a way to do this in a much better sort of way. And I think it's only in the last 18 months we've gotten to the point where the AI agents are performing as well as human agents. And that's a huge transition because of the underlying LLMs and technology that is new. So before that, there's actually a lot of what they're called interactive voice agents, or interact IVRs, right? Is a different sort of version of it, where you're talking with a robotic thing. All of that will be replaced by these new generative AI agents. So first of all, that's a huge, huge amount of stuff. Second, now we're going into teams and saying, what are your humans doing that could be done by AI? And I'd say it's 20 to 30% of the voice interactions today are kind of the ones being moved over, the simplest interactions. But at this point, I think it's sort of fait accompli that within 3, 5 years, whatever horizon you think, 90% of the voice interactions will be AI. There'll always be some escalated, more complicated ones that'll be human, but the AI will handle all of them. And so, like, we're not far from that world. Now the challenges are things like legal questions and integration questions and automation questions, and so there are things that are still very challenging, but it's not, can the agents do this anymore?
What about internally inside of companies? Are companies ever going to like how does this technology play out in terms of either like a remote company or just a really large company? Are we going to be doing knowledge transfer via voice agent? Are these things going to start to do training and development inside of companies?
Yeah, so the three kinds of agents people usually are talking about. So one is what they usually consider like a personal agent. So think of like shopping or maybe helping you with some to remember things or maybe a mental health sort of case, perhaps. But those are like a personal category. Second is, work agent. So you're an engineer and you use Cursor today to help you code, or you're a marketer and use something to help you do marketing better. Third is what we're talking about, which is really company agents, which are saying instead of you having to come to a website, or instead of you having to send us an email, instead of you going to our social page, or instead of you going to our app, the main interface, this won't just be for customer support, right? The main interface you will have with most brands will be conversational.
Mm.
And guess why that's so great? Well, you talk fast when you type, you're more emotive. My kids are young. They walk up to a TV and they say, turn on, right? It's
Yeah.
just they assume that that's the way you interact with things. It is more natural to do it that way. So, I think like most companies are going to start using it for that sort of external use case. To your point, for internal things, sure, like, they can handle all those use cases for recruiting, for internal training, for all that
Mm.
stuff. It'll just be a question of, you know, how quickly companies adopt it. The provocative things that people talk about are two different topics. One, how many employees will you have at a company in the future? Well, in the old days, it was 1,000 employees and 10 vendors. Maybe in the new days, it'll be 10 employees or even one employee, but 1,000 vendors, and the interaction point will be AI. So that's a completely different way of thinking about building a company. And people are asking the question, before you hire, could AI do this job? Which is new. And then the other provocative thing is, well, if I have a company agent, for my brand, I sell shoes online, I have a company agent, and my consumer is a personal agent that does shopping. Well, am I selling to consumer anymore, or is my AI selling to your AI, which is sort of amusing.
Mm. Yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot about of machine to machine because we have B2B and then we have B2C, and now it seems like more and more is going to be machine to machine. And it also reminds me of all of the stuff I've been building as a vibe coder, a non-technical vibe coder who's somehow becoming technical, but not in the traditional way. There are technical topics I'm learning about and getting much more in depth, but it's not in the same way. And I'm noticing that there's this thing about there's the knowledge that I need to know in order to direct and guide the AI to do what I want. And then there's a whole bunch of knowledge that the machine needs to know in order to do the thing. Some of that knowledge I need to give the machine that knowledge. Some of it I don't, and it's actually a detriment. Like it feels like a really bad area of focus for me to be focusing on what the machine needs to know. Like there's so
Yeah.
much the machine needs to know. And so it feels like we're moving into rapidly into a world where like there'll just be these deep unconscious things, unconscious for us, not unconscious for the robot. Any thoughts there about where knowledge work is going in terms of what type of knowledge, how much to go into these things?
Yeah, sure. I think about my father who had one job his whole life, basically. When he started work and they wanted to know something, he went to the library and he checked out a book and he opened it up. Like he wanted to talk to somebody, he got on a plane and he went to see them. You know, that was where they started. Now, over the time, obviously they got the internet and an email and video calls and whatever over his generation, but it was a huge transition. And I think, similarly, like we're going to be much more efficient by leveraging AI agents. Now, I believe that with that efficiency comes all kinds of new cool businesses and opportunities, and there'll be more jobs. Like there's never been a case in the history of innovation so far where an innovation caused fewer jobs in the long run. So the washing machine, the internet, whatever, all these things, people were freaked out, but ended up, creating more jobs. In terms of inside of companies, there's two different sort of directions I think about. One is how do you create the ontology of knowledge sort of within a company or within your own life? That'll become very important, right? So
Mhm.
if you may have two books on your shelf, one that says democracy is good and one that says democracy is bad. Now, if you give AI access to all the books on your shelf, how does it know whether you think democracy is good or democracy is bad? It doesn't know. But if you have an ontology which says, I think democracy is good,
Hmm.
and I want to make sure I understand the arguments on both sides, now it's a different category. So the ontology of information will become more and more important. Categorization becomes more and more important, so that the AI can understand the context of the knowledge that exists. So that's one. And then I'd say the other direction that gets interesting is, and the way I usually talk about this is, imagine Steve Jobs still existed, like, and Apple wasn't the laggard in AI. Like, what would have Steve Jobs built? Well, he would have built this like invisible thing that was always there, but you weren't worried about privacy implications for some reason, and it just like helped you. Like it would have access to everything in your, in your phone, and somehow it would, that context would turn it into something quite helpful. And obviously, Apple's not doing that. And Tim Cook, if you're listening, like, please go do that, but in a privacy and safe way, of course.
Yeah.
But I just think like there's the opportunity for that. The closest effort is a company called Rewind, um, and I don't think they're anywhere close to that yet. But I think they're probably the furthest along in that direction of like record everything and use it to do something.
Yeah, it gets into really interesting territory. That I think a lot about, particularly from this angle of centralization versus decentralization. The lady who's on the board of Signal kind of put out a big warning to everybody, saying like this is a huge privacy censorship type of thing, because the AI
Yeah.
needs to centralize everything in order to be helpful in that way that you described. There's a whole bunch of people working in sort of crypto decentralization with TIEs and all of these homomorphic.
Yeah, look,
Go for it.
I
Yeah.
started my career in the privacy world, and we tried to bring sort of more selectivity and choice to American consumers.
They don't
Americans
care.
don't care.
Yeah.
They're willing to have the better experience in exchange for worse privacy and security.
Yeah.
Now, in Europe, it's the opposite. The culture is very different. People make the opposite choice. So I'm not saying everyone will choose to give up their data, but if history is any indication, if you make a product that is better because the data is centralized, guess what? Americans are going to use it.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that overarching point, but I do think that there are a small amount of people who do have enough technical knowledge, and I'm speaking about myself here as well, of that, and do prioritize those things. And the key thing is that AI now makes it so much easier to build products. So I'm less interested in buying or using other people's products and developing these sorts of solutions for myself. And this goes back to that
Yeah.
centralization thing, which is that I use a thing called Anki spaced repetition, and traditionally for learning languages and doing other things, but also for coding. And now it's morphed into my task manager, and it's sort of morphing into my AI usage. And so going forward, that's the product I'm going to build for myself in order to get to this centralization thing. And I now that I can set up a server, now that I can do all these things, I'm less and less interested in depending on a centralized party, a third party, as the intervening type of thing that will
Oh
that I
yeah.
depend on. Yeah.
Yeah, like, will there be a world, for instance, the data, obviously, I agree with the point you're making, but let's leave the data aside. But will there be a world where you go to your favorite brand, I don't know, Patagonia, and they have some default AI agent, but you say, no, no, I want
Yeah.
my agent
Yeah.
to be the one that I integrate, and, or maybe Patagonia pays for the 5 cent a version of the AI agent, but I'm willing to pay for the 20-cent version per minute, which is X more, it's more pleasant for me to, and as a consumer, I make that decision and not the brand. So
Mhm.
it's not just about data. It's also about, the sort of bring your own tools concept to the world. How are you going to bring your own tools to the world so that you don't have to interact with what they've built, but you get to interact with a version that's customized to you?
That's interesting. How do you think this whole world, this machine to machine world, is going to evolve into something like is it just going to be this giant iceberg underneath the surface that humans don't really pay attention to, where machines are paying other machines? Like, where do you think finance and commerce are going in this world?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I don't have a very developed like vision of where it'll be. I can tell you sort of where I think the first step is. So I think the first step that's happening is for sure, in the same way you have like a password filler on your
Mm,
computer,
mm,
there's going to be a sort of a password filler, even like where
mm,
it's just
mm,
like you don't have to be thinking about that. But I think we're already kind of walking into that with, Apple Pay. Like I don't walk around with a credit card anymore, right? There's like a restaurant near me that doesn't accept Apple Pay, and I don't go there anymore because I don't ever remember my credit card. So, I think basically like, that sort of concept is already happening. And Apple, I think to their credit, started building from the beginning this idea of, well, when you're going to do a transaction, like hide your email address, right? Have a masked email. But like,
Mm,
and in the credit card world, there's a concept of a masked credit card where you just give the token instead of the actual credit card number.
yeah,
So I
interesting.
think, yeah, there's a potential of more and more of that, of like maybe what I give a brand is the token that says, hey, I'm a high intent buyer. I'm in this decade of my life and I'm whatever. And I'm willing to give them that in exchange for a sort of a more tailored experience. But what I'm not giving them is my birthday, my address, or exactly my search history. So the tokenized version of this can be enough for them to personalize without them actually having the real data. And that's an important concept in privacy that America hasn't made much progress on.
Interesting. Apple's trying to do it with homomorphic encryption, right? They're trying to do things on data without offering up that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not even it's just beyond that. It's like what often happens, like people misunderstand how companies use their data. What often happens is the
Mm,
company's not actually trying to know your specific address. What they're trying to find out is, well, you live in this area or have this general income. Because when they're going to go send a tailored email, it's often not tailored one for one, it's tailored to people in a certain thing.
mm.
So as long as you can give them something that's generally right, that's enough for them. And for you, it maintains your privacy because you're never giving them the actual specific information about yourself in a way that could identify an individual.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like the privacy questions we were asking in the 1990s don't really make sense because and it's also sort of a philosophical point on class, which the sort of idea of class or groups of people are more important to the companies than individual identification or individual like
in
yeah.
many cases it's enough. Like, I don't know, would brands tell you they want every piece of data? Maybe, but the reality is that the tokenized version of it is probably enough. And
Hmm.
so we'll see how this all develops, and again, whether the Americans become more aware of privacy. But there are all kinds of there's been a lot of thought in this area, it just hasn't
Hmm.
really been implemented.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting philosophically about the nature of an individual, and we have this sense that we are individuals, and the privacy question really goes to that individual thing, going back to the 90s and the 60s, like all the way, the founding of the United States. This is like privacy was a big thing, and I think a lot of people, if they were to sort of teleport from the 80s and the 90s into our current world, they would be horrified by the levels of privacy changes that Americans are
Yeah.
to go through. But it's also like the wrong question. It's like it's not the most important information to companies, and it's also companies. I mean, governments are also doing a lot of this stuff as well, and that was the main thing in the 1960s to the 1990s was stopping the governments from doing it. Um,
Yeah.
okay. So the tokenized version, do you think crypto will serve a role in building these tokenized machine-to-machine experiences, or is this going to be final?
I Yeah, I have to be honest. I'm not a huge fan of Web3.
Yeah.
I think it's a technology in search of a problem, as they say. Like, I think they're very interesting concepts in decentralized systems.
Uh,
And even in the privacy world, prior to like Web3, there were problems that could be solved with decentralization. So I think that it is true that the ACH system in the United States is ridiculous. And if there were some more decentralized version, it could be better. And I believe in all that. But I think most of the people working in Web3 going, it's a crypto system, but for this, like either they're trying to use it as marketing, which I don't know, I never am a fan of, or they just don't understand the underlying problem, and it's, I think, a waste of people's time. So look, I'm very pessimistic on that area, maybe unduly, but just that's my perspective. So I think like it's not necessarily a crypto solution. I think there are, for now, like, yeah, for now it's still just doing it in the normal centralized way, and we'll see if in the future it changes.
and you're talking about centralization in terms of a company that is centralized, that is making the decision, or a centralized database.
Yeah, your bank, like I'm not saying the government, that's a different whole level of whatever. Like, don't give your data to the IRS anymore. They might tell everybody about
Yeah.
it. Like
Yeah.
that's a
Uh,
different thing.
yeah.
People are really scared about that now. So I'm
Uh,
thinking more, Bank of America, I'm okay them having some level of data. My healthcare provider, I'm okay with them having some level of data. You know, do I assume that my data will get hacked a certain number of times a year? Yeah, honestly, like I kind of, yeah, I don't know that my local doctor really knows what they're doing with it. So like if there's something really I don't want people to know, well, yeah, don't put it anywhere.
mm, And that goes back to the AI question because the LLM specifically seem to be really good at finding needles in a haystack. I've been building a vectorized database, which is really interesting to kind of go back and
Yeah.
like if with Google with search, it was peer reviewed or peer ranked algorithms, so it would basically go find out how many things link to this one thing. And now we've got LLMs that turn a database into this vector thing that I still don't quite understand totally, but gives it meaning associations that get it closer. And so you can search by
Yeah.
meaning and semantics. And so it is this world where you can now really pinpoint a piece of information. Like you put the book into the LLM and you can find a specific thing in that book much better than a traditional database. And it's so what does that do to society? What does that do to this conversation we've been having? Is that just the incentive to get everything into the LLM is much bigger, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's going to be very interesting. So this question of like this decision of whether to put something in there, and then you mentioned Rewind AI. There's a bunch of wearables, like all of the everything will just get into this thing. And I wonder, like, there's one question that like governments and how they're going to morph their systems to go back to old school Faraday cages and that type of stuff. But then there's also
Yeah.
like industrial espionage and just like or just privacy, like not wanting to put this thing into the machine. Any thoughts about
Yeah.
where we're headed?
Well, look, I remember I wrote a paper in like elementary school. Like I look back and I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. Where I was like, what'll happen is you'll walk down the street. So this was in late 90s, I guess. So you'll walk down the street and it will recognize your eyes, it'll recognize the direction you're looking. The display will create an ad tailored to you that only you will see. And like and I wasn't thinking about the internet in those days. Clearly, that's literally what happened on the internet. Like, but I was thinking more in the physical world. But I think like, when I was writing it at the time, I didn't think of it as that dystopian, I suppose, because I didn't understand the negative connotations associated with that. But today, if you were to have a paper like that, like it would be considered dystopian, right? You would go, "Oh my God, like how do they know who that it's you?" Like, so this is where I think again, Steve Jobs was so magic is somehow convincing people that the value is worth the trade. And
Mm,
I think ultimately that's what I come back to. So when I was in the privacy world, one of the questions we talked with brands about was, okay, when you're asking a customer for data in some form, do they understand what they're getting in exchange? Because where they do, the completion rate is
yeah.
very high, but where they don't, yeah, people don't do it. So that implicit trade is an important concept of you shouldn't be collecting things on customers surreptitiously. You should be explicit what you're getting from them and what you're giving in exchange for that. And so, for instance, if the thing was, I'm gonna watch this is a real example, your use of water, and what you're gonna get for it is I'm gonna save you 30% on your bill every month. People would be like, oh my God, watch my water all day long. Like I don't care that much about it. Sure, you know some information about me, but it's worth that amount of money. Or if you say, I'm gonna watch the mileage on your car, and in exchange for that, I'm going to give you a better price or better insurance. Of course you do it. Now, if I flip that and I come and say, no, I'm just going to watch everywhere you go in your car, you're going, no, 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 thank you. So the context of that give and get is very important.
Uh, which is funny because that brings in GDPR, which feels like every time I go through one of those GDPR forms, I have no idea what I'm doing. But that was their intention, right? That was their intention to make it really clear what was going on with the cookies and the privacy. And it seems like it's totally like done the opposite, basically. It's just like frustrating.
Yeah, yeah, and the definitions around how this stuff actually works are a little bit absurd. So I agree, it hasn't worked that well. The closest to that's worked a little bit at least is OAuth, the protocol.
Uh,
Like when you go and
uh,
put in your Gmail and and instead of like creating a new password to some site, you just use Gmail to sign into a site, and the site says Gmail is going to give us your photo and your email address and these three things, and you say yes, yes, yes. That's in the United States, that's the best example of clear opt-in. The other one that's happened more recently is obviously now in Apple when you say ask app not to track. Those are probably the two best examples in the United
mm,
States of opt-in for privacy.
and well communicated sort of decisions. So funny because then that brings to mind the terms of service, which are like so ridiculous because you click on Facebook and nobody ever reads them, but then the AI comes in and now I mean that brings the voice agents back into the conversation as well. Like where are we headed like philosophically speaking, it's funny because Socrates he was complaining about people writing that if we start writing, then we'll lose this really important thing of oral tradition and everything like that. And that's the last 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Everybody was just writing everything down. And now we're quickly entering the world back into what Socrates was living, but we also have this like intelligent presence that's with us and that can, listen in with rewind or listen in with all these sort of things. And are we going back to an oral culture? Is that where we're headed?
Look, like I said at the beginning, I really do believe speaking is
Yeah.
better than typing. Like, of course, there are going to be use cases for typing. You're in a meeting or whatever, so like that won't go away. But we do like it is so much easier. We speak faster than we type. We emote better. We don't have to think as much about what like the context we're trying to set. Like, so I do think in a world where sort of all this stuff becomes better, like voice will become more and more important. Like it'll be 90% of the way you interact with brands instead of 50% or sub 50% now in some cases. It'll be the way you turn on your like TV on, go to channel 55. Like you won't say, hey, brother, like grab the remote and like find the ESPN and like try to type, like it'll just, yeah. So I do think voice is a more natural interaction. And as it becomes more conversational, it'll be easier and easier. I mean, I think back to like the example with Zuckerberg, where every year he learn something new. So one
Uh-huh.
year it was hunting, one year I think it was learning a language, one year it was building himself like an at-home agent. And it was pre-LLM, so I'm sure it'd be much better now. But that I think people have always had that dream, like, of the how do I walk into my house and I have this personal assistant that I can just talk to.
How, like in your personal life, are you now primarily voice? Are you writing things still? Like what's your
Yeah, so I use a lot of voice because it was sort of what we do, but I'd say most of the technologies don't yet have that interface. So it's still very early days. Like the TV, you can hit the button and do it. Alexa, you can say hi Alexa and do it, but those are a little bit harder. And then the place I use voice a lot is actually I have a system where post meetings, instead of me like at the end of the day like going and writing stuff out, after every meeting I take a voice note which gets automatically translated into an email and like to-dos. So I heavily use voice in the day-to-day in that sense. But yeah, I think the one sort of cool use case that I've started hearing more about is a lot of people now when they're prepping for meetings, instead of typing stuff out or looking for data, they'll take ChatGPT voice mode and they'll just say, "Hey, tell me about Stewart and what's going on with him and what questions is he going to ask me and here's what I want to say to him. How do you think he'll react? And if I wanted to to I don't know, pull on his heartstrings, what would I say?" And it's incredible, actually, like what ChatGPT can come back with based off of just what's publicly available.
in back into your product? Did you guys build your own proprietary technology in terms of that voice interaction? Or are you guys plugging into something else?
No. So it's one of the more important things. So for years, everybody tried to build their own natural language processing, which is what it used to be called before they came up with transformers and LLMs. And still today, there are some people who say, "Hey, I built a custom LLM." You should like run the other direction when people say that. Like you want to be using the tools that are getting billions of dollars pumped into them. It is the best deal of a lifetime,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Some crazy investor gave them billions of dollars for very little equity. They took those billions of dollars and made a product and charged you very little for it. Like it is literally investors handing you cash. It's like early days of Uber.
Yeah.
There was no reason not to ride it because literally they were giving you free rides basically, or it's like $1 or $2. So you want to be using these big sort of public models. Obviously, there are cases where you use the smaller versions or you customize them a little bit or you train them a bit. Like that's all quite easy, but you want to be on those models. What we've done is a couple things, right? So we've built the application layer on top of it. It allows you to use those models specifically to build production AI agents. So the problems
Mm.
we've solved, for instance, are How do you integrate with all the different data systems in a company?
Mm.
How do you make sure the AI agent does what it's supposed to do? How do you orchestrate action? So like updating a CRM, sending an SMS, taking a payment, or taking functions that the LLM don't do well. So LLMs are terrible at knowing the distance between 2 points. You
Mm.
know, like how long does it take me to drive to this? So like, for instance, that's a function on our side. Or LLMs are bad at dates. And like
Mm.
telling, so like there are certain functions we take on our side. And then ultimately, we also handle all the things like A/B testing, iteration, learning, whatever. So there's a lot of pieces for the sort of company AI agent side that we've built out. Someone else will build on an LLM how to use an AI agent to make a movie. And I think that'll be also a very valuable business. So I think the underlying technologies will get used in many different ways, but no, we are not trying to build a new LLM.
So you're becoming an orchestration platform. Can anybody use your product? Do you have to be a company of a certain size?
It's enterprise. So I'd say minimum 400 people at a company, something like that,
Uh-huh.
500 people at a company. And part of what we do for eligible customers is not only do we give them a product which is self-serve, but we actually give them free implementation resources from our side because we find that it's a new enough technology that people can get 80% of the way there. Like people can make a demo pretty easily. But in order to get this really production ready, we have a lot of capabilities in the platform that are not what you hear about that are not so obvious. And so it takes somebody from our side helping you start to use these new things to fine tune what you're doing and actually make an AI agent that works as well as a human. Look, over time, these concepts will become more native to everybody. And so like if I said, hey, what is temperature when it relates to AI? People will go, well, I don't know. Like, but as you start understanding what temperature is, it's a very important concept and something you learn how to use to get to a certain outcome.
Hmm. What have you learned from interacting with these large companies and doing, quote unquote, digital transformation? Are you familiar with like all the what I'm blanking? There's this great philosophy of coordination costs. What have you learned about coordination costs from not only
Yeah.
interacting with big companies, but also implementing this technology that cuts
Yeah.
away that?
So I worked for the head of strategy at a, I don't know, 50,000 person company
Uh,
years ago. So I have a good idea of what it's like at bigger companies. And I think, there's two sides to the coin. On one side, they have such good businesses that it supports 50,000 people, and that's like amazing. But on the other side, look, you probably could literally walk up to the CEO of that company and tell him you're building the thing that was going to destroy his company, and there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. So like it really got me over the fear of like, oh no, don't tell anybody your idea because maybe they'll steal it. It's
yeah.
like, guys, like, no, like they're not going to be able to do this. Don't worry. So it's not that big companies can't move quickly and can't whatever. It's just it's a different operating rhythm. And to your point on communication costs, if you have two dots, there's one line between them. If you have 100 dots, there's exponentially more lines between them. The cost of communication is real. And so it's really hard at larger businesses to keep people aligned and to do change management. Even
Mm.
if you know what the answer is, to get everybody to go and change is hard.
And
I'd say what's interesting about, sorry, go ahead.
have you learned, like, what have you learned in terms of the implementation for a large company that you've learned that was sort of counterintuitive? Like, how have you managed that thing that you just talked about in terms of actually implementing technology inside of a large company?
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say what's really interesting about AI agents is it's very different than a normal software sale. So normally when somebody has a piece of software, the entropy is to just keep using it, right? Unless it like literally breaks. Like you're like there are banks that still are built on Cobalt because like the entropy is just keep using that thing and never change it. Contact center labor is different. If you do nothing, 40% of your contact center team will have quit by the end of the year. So
Whoa.
actually, like the entropy is for it to go away. And so they're constantly hiring and training and whatever. And so if you tell them, hey, you're going to get an agent that you can hire and train, and they're never going to quit on you and they're never going to give you lip and they're always going to do what you say, guess what? They go, oh, thank God. So the entropy is different in the contact center. And if a human agent in the US costs $1 a minute, or maybe offshore 30 cents a minute, AI agent costs 10 to 20 cents a minute. So you go, well, it's not like I have to ask for more budget. If I trade out one human agent for one AI agent, I just save the company a bunch of money, which is also a very different situation. You're not going and making a budget request, you're just saving the company money for every time you do it.
Mm,
So that means that, and the third part that's important is we really don't need to rip and replace any software. There are no incumbent players in the space. Like everything is
mm,
net new.
mm,
So those three things make it so that for the first time in a long time, and this happens every decade or so, but the first time in a long time, there is a software product that you can sell to the Fortune 500 largest enterprises on a 2-month deal cycle and have, the contracts worth millions of dollars a year. And everybody is rooting for this, right? So like there was a recent customer where the AI agent performed very well, but in the first like 2 weeks, it was like a little bit below the human agents. And you're always worried in that situation. And you go, well, what are they going to do? Are they just going to say like we quit? And they come back to the table, and the company goes, oh, here's the 10 next things we want to do, and we have all these theories on what's going to make it better. And we go, and it turns out the CEO had seen it and goes, this is the future. I don't care what you have to do. Like, go make this work.
mm,
And so when you have that level of alignment from the top, it doesn't require any switching costs on technology. The entropy is to like do something new. The cost is better. Like everything is aligned for that organization to go and do this. So I think that's unusual for a product. If anything, the worry in the long run is, how sticky is this going to be? So like if it's always with software, if it's too easy to get something in, well, then it'd be easy for them to take a new product in. So I think that's the unknown. Will this be like a flat screen TV where 10 years ago it was $10,000 for flat screen TV and you changed it every year until now it's,
mm,
$1,000 for the same 60-inch TV? Or is it like HVAC, where 10 years ago you put in the newest HVAC system and went out throughout your house? And even though there's a new, better one today that's half the price, you can't put it in because it's so ingrained into your house. So
mm.
I don't know, will it be HVAC or flat screen TV? Time will tell.
That's a really interesting point about sort of deflation. It seems like everybody in the world right now is sort of at least those who are paying attention to the evolution of AI. It's just there's so much uncertainty because of how quickly it's moving. And there's like the new ChatGPT vision or a new ChatGPT image model, which creates these images that are very good,
Mhm.
basically takes out the necessity of something like Gamma.ai, which Gamma was a great for doing decks and presentations. And now
Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, now I'm not so sure about whether I would use that in the
Yeah.
future. So it's all changing really, really quickly. And like software ate the world, and now AI is eating software. And it seems just like massive uncertainty. There's where there's opportunity, but there's also just chaos, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a philosophical, I think, disagreement now within AI agents, particularly in our world of on one side, they're the people that say, well, basically you need to tell it, say this thing, then say that thing, then
Mm.
say the other thing. And sure, it's a bit more conversational, but effectively it's the same as, a form just via audio.
Yeah.
On the other side, the people say, no, you tell it you're a contact center agent, keep people happy, help them reset their password. And it has to figure out the rest. Now the reality is probably somewhere in between, but I think that sort of like we have some customers that fall on one side and some that fall on the other. And the consequences of
Mhm.
even with the same exact technology, a very different experience for the customer, depending on which way they fall.
Have you guys been able to fix the problem that came out really early, which was I remember there was a Canadian company, a Canadian airline that had a chatbot that allowed people to or that said something about the refund that then got taken to
Mhm.
court and was then held up in court, and so the airline had to, so it was a big like moment like, oh, we got to back up from this crazy
Yeah.
probabilistic
Oh,
technical.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, everyone's heard about it. I mean,
Yeah.
look, the way the metaphor I use is imagine as a contact center, you go take somebody off the street and you put them on the phones, you say, do what you want.
Yeah.
But guess what? It's going to go badly. They're going to say crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So, on the other hand, if you take them and you train them for weeks, you give them the script, you give them the objection handling, you say what you're not allowed to say, they're going to do great. Now, will the human sometimes say the wrong thing? Like I ran a contact center. Let me tell you,
Yeah.
they will say the wrong thing a lot. So the same is true with AI, which is if you kind of give it too much of the temperature is too high and
Yeah.
there's few guardrails and doesn't have any knowledge bases, yeah, it'll kind of say all kinds of stuff. But if you train it, meaning it has the right knowledge bases, the right prompt structure, the right guardrails, lower temperature, no, we don't have any like one of the big changes now is it used to be that if you asked AI a question and it didn't know the answer, it would just make shit up. Now you can make it so that AI, if it doesn't know the answer, says I don't know. So that's a big, or
Mhm.
even not just doesn't know the answer. If it doesn't have a certain certainty, it won't say anything. So that's a big change, but it's not an AI problem. This is just a like
A
setup and
training.
training problem. There are still like really hard problems in this world. So like in a contact center, you have a new person, they look at the knowledge base and there's two different articles. One says give them the refund, one says doesn't. They turn to the person next to them and says, which one is right? And they go, oh yeah, of course this one. Well, an AI agent can't do that. So when there's a conflict in a knowledge base, how do you solve that if there's no tribal knowledge? Is
Mm,
it based on the date it was written, the person who wrote it? Do you have to ask a human? Is it, I don't know. So all those things are really complicated problems where it's not actually that the AI did something that was worse. It's just that it's accentuating the problem that existed in the company. The other thing we're seeing now, which is very funny, is we go into highly regulated industries and we say, okay, give us a script of what you want the agent to do, more or less, and send us two calls to your best agents. The reason we ask for send us two calls to your best agents is
mm,
100% of the time, the best agents do not do the script. And then it gets to be this interesting debate internally where you go, okay, legal approved that script, and then legal is not okay with what your human agents are saying. And are you going to make the AI agent do the script or do the thing your human agents are doing that is successful? And these companies are currently out of compliance,
yeah.
but legal, it's like I see no evil. Like legal
Yeah.
doesn't know it, and so they don't do anything about it. But when it comes to an AI agent, are they going to force the thing that is compliant, or are they going to allow it to do what's successful? And so it just brings up again, it's not that the AI inherently is doing anything right or wrong. It forces the company to ask these questions again.
Giving me,
Like,
yeah.
hey, the human agents are lying. This happens all the time. Human agents are exaggerating. They're saying something which legal would not approve, but it gets the thing sold. The AI agent, they don't want it to ever say that. But the
Mm.
human agents are saying,
It's almost like the same problem that self-driving cars have, which is that mm, the ability for them to make errors is way, way, way smaller than what a human. And also makes me think that we're entering a world where it's almost like philosophically the unconscious is about to become conscious because we have this layer of information seeking from this technology that is just captures everything. Like what you just talked about, there's a whole bunch in that tribal knowledge, you're solving a problem that wasn't even recognized as a problem because humans do it so intuitively to just turn to the other human and ask them what's going on. But now we've got this natural language agent who's going in just uncovering all of this unconscious stuff about how we all do business. So philosophically, I think that's going to be interesting territory as how we deal with this as human beings is just like entering this world where things that were unconscious are now becoming conscious. Like generally, when you take people through therapy or any sort of thing like that, it's not a comfortable process when that happens. So there's an interesting thing there. Another point that I was getting was knowledge management. You're that tribal knowledge. I was formerly a director of knowledge management, and that tribal knowledge is that implicit knowledge. And it makes me think that you might have a good insight into knowledge management. Have you ever thought about knowledge management? Have you ever worked at a company with knowledge management? What is your take on
"Hmm,
knowledge management?
yeah, yeah. So I studied philosophy and psychology undergrad. So like I believe, I sort of understand the underlying sort of concepts, I guess, of what the dangers are in this area. I think, in practicality, what ends up happening is there's these knowledge silos at companies. Some are tribal knowledge, to your point, some are technology systems, some are by team, whatever, so on and so forth. Some are access level, but and it creates problems all the time where one person knows something and acts based on that knowledge, and another person knows a different set of things and acts based on that knowledge, and then the outcome is bad. So in the world for customer service, the example that I always give is sort of the blind man and the elephant, which is like, one person talks to the customer and goes, oh, this is their, the trunk.
Yeah.
Another person talks to the customer and goes, oh, they're feeling, the tail. Another person feeling the side. And they think the customer wants three different things because nobody is looking at it holistically and saying, well, I see that on the website they clicked on a red sedan. In email, they told me I wanted a red truck, and in whatever with the AI agent, they said they wanted a red scooter. Well, what they want is a red thing to do transportation, not a scooter or a truck or whatever. Like, but because they're looking at the three different things without context, they don't get the right conclusion.
That's really interesting. And are you going to build knowledge management into your company? Are you going to, is like, as you build this company, how important will knowledge management and how are you thinking about that from a strategy angle?
Yeah. So obviously in our world, they call it RAG.
Uh,
And so we use these vector databases to sort of make sure we have access to the right data. So I'd say there's I don't know that this by itself is a whole conversation, but let's start with like a simple concept, which is in when people were making AI agents for email and chat, which were considered to be important channels in the past, the concept was make sure you have very high accuracy, even if it takes 10 seconds, 20 seconds to get an answer, because latency doesn't matter. Well, I think like email and chat are going to go away. I think the future is voice. And in
Hmm.
voice, the opposite is true. You can't take 20 seconds to get an answer. You have to be able to answer instantly, even if the answer is, I don't know, or even if the answer is, hey, it's going to take me 20 seconds to find this answer. Let me get back to you. And
Hmm.
so the underlying the companies that started in chat and email that are now trying to move in voice actually have to rip
Hmm.
out their entire RAG system, knowledge-based system, or they're going to have a problem. The companies that started in voice, right? It's a very different set of things that we're trying to achieve to maintain that latency on the phone that feels human. The other funny thing is, is people are much more judgmental of the AI than they are of the humans, to your point. So, like, we measure humans, and when you ask a human a question, they take 2 or 3 seconds to answer, and you go, well, this is shitty customer service, but whatever. When an AI does it, oh my God, the AI didn't answer right away. And you're like, guys,
Yeah.
go measure your humans. Like they ask the complicated question. So I think that's where I say,
Mm.
the AI has to, even if it's just to say, give me a second, you've got to make sure that you are acknowledging what the customer is looking for while you're sort of looking for something more complicated. Now, those cases are extreme. So the 90% of cases, our latency is sub a second across everything, even with pretty complicated RAG. It's not until you're getting into tens of thousands of documents that these things become real issues. But in the largest enterprise, that is possible.
That's so interesting. The latency thing, that seems like the most interesting thing. OpenAI did a pretty good job of it with the ChatGPT advanced mo voice, but it's really still kind of just crazy how like what we're doing right now. There's this back and forth. There's like subtle markers of when to take over, when to ask a new question, when to speak, all these different things. And you guys have actually like programmed that into a voice chat. What is the hardest thing that most people don't understand about what we're doing right now that's really difficult to teach the machine?
Something that's difficult to get the AI to do.
Yeah, well, just or like what is the hardest thing to replicate in a voice agent that we as humans do naturally in terms of this back and forth?
Yeah, I'll answer it two different ways. So one is like, what are examples of the AI isn't there? And I can also answer things that the AI can do that we can't do.
Interesting.
So, uh, in a human conversation, all else being equal, like it's sort of 500 millisecond, maybe 400 millisecond latency. AI now you can get down to that, but not with the best models. So the best models, it's closer to 700 millisecond, 800 milliseconds. So it's a little bit noticeable still. I don't think, again, we can get it to the 400, but
Yeah.
the quality is a little worse. So I think we're pretty close to getting there. It obviously is all the harder when it's on telephone because there's extra lag because of all that stuff.
Uh,
But yeah, that's sort of getting very close. We talked about how the voices aren't there yet, and I don't think they're far. There are some examples out there where they can do it with a little bit of latency. The problem is, I think a lot of people are seeing examples that are, I wouldn't say faked, but are
hmm.
highly contrived, where people are running models that are very, very small LLMs in a very local thing without a phone in between it. It's on WebRTC. I don't know.
Yeah,
So in a highly
interesting.
contrived
Yeah,
environment, you can make it sound much better than what it would sound like if it was actually uh,
on the
uh,
phone.
yeah, or whatever. So yeah, so I think there's all of that stuff going on that's interesting. I think then in terms of understanding like AI right now that is using first speech to text, then a text-based LLM, and then
Mhm.
back text to speech. One of the things that happens is it can't tell the difference between two speakers because
Yes.
literally
Yeah,
the
yeah.
LLM is not getting the two different speakers, it's just getting text. So that's a gap today. I think as you move to voice LLMs, it'll become possible to start identifying the different speakers because it doesn't go text to speech, it goes straight through to voice.
Wow.
Another thing is in humans, there's what's called mirroring. So if I get excited, you get excited. It's a natural human sort of thing to do. AI agents don't have the ability to mirror again because it's going text to speech. So there are two paths to that. One is simultaneous sentiment analysis that's updating the model sort of on how it should talk, and the other is in the voice LLMs completely doing this in a different way. Similar to the sentiment, there's some challenges in the continuity of tonality throughout a conversation for AI. You'll notice that it'll talk kind of a little sad for a while and then a little happy for a while, and it's kind of the words will like they'll say one word with a up intonation and one with a down intonation and won't connect right. So there are gaps like this that are known in all of that are being worked on. But on the flip side, if I say what are things the AI can do that humans can't, well, it's always available 24/7, immediately, all the time. It's omnipotent, right? Every piece of knowledge I give it, whatever, if I tell it, don't talk about Brangelina, it will never talk about Brangelina like it listens to me, which is not the same as the agents that I used to manage.
Yeah.
So this, dates me, obviously. And AI agents also have they don't sort of hold something against people. So
Uh-huh.
like we work in a lot of cases with, let's say it's an elderly person calling in, or let's say it's somebody who's called in a third time, or somebody who's frustrated. With a human agent, they get frustrated and they talk back, or they don't answer, or literally they will hang up on customers. The AI does not lose its cool ever. It's always fine with the customer, is always able to do the next thing and help them. That's an enormous, yeah, that's an enormous change, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Um, there's a question about sort of influence that I'm like in sales and other things like that, how influential these models are going to start to get for psychology. Um,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
like one of our investors was talking with Altman and asked Altman basically, "What's this? I have little kids. What
yeah,
skill should I teach them in the future? Is it coding? Is it prompt engineering?" And Altman said, "No, it's influence." He said the thing that is the most important ability and the thing that is most human and hardest for the models to recreate is the ability to influence other people. So look, I don't know whether or not you believe the AI will ever get there. I don't know, different topic, but I take the point, which is like don't necessarily go take away from this, you should teach your kids engineering. Take away from this that there are things like influencing other people that are very valuable skill sets that they should learn. And even if one day the models can learn them, they'll help teach the models on how to do it. But influencing other people is one of the uniquely important skills to teach
mm,
your kids.
very cool. Thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people find out more about you and find out more about Regal?
Sure. Go to regal.ai, or you can always email me at hello@regal.ai. If you're a company today that has over 100 agents doing customer support or sales, we'd love to chat with you about what we're seeing. At a high level, we're seeing AI agents perform as well as humans at a fraction of the cost, and it's completely transforming people's cost structure and the experiences they can build for humans.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.